The Memoria Biologica died like a wounded bird, its massive hull screaming through atmosphere thick as honey. Dr. Elena Vasquez pressed her palm against the neural interface, feeling the ship's death throes echo through her consciousness as synaptic circuits fried one by one. The bioluminescent corridors flickered and dimmed, casting dancing shadows across the walls lined with 10,000 cryogenic pods, each one containing the last remnants of Earth's vanished species. Hull breach in sectors 7 through 12, the ship's voice whispered, already distorting as higher functions collapsed. Estimated impact in 4 minutes, 37 seconds. Emergency protocols engaging. Elena's fingers danced across the holographic controls, her movements precise despite the ship's violent convulsions. 23 years as chief curator of the Biological Heritage Project had taught her to work under pressure, but nothing had prepared her for this. The mission to establish a new arc on Kepler 442b was supposed to be routine, a milk run to humanity's newest colony world. Instead, they'd emerge from fold space to find themselves in orbit around something that shouldn't exist, a world transformed beyond recognition, its surface covered in vast networks of silver trees that pulsed with their own inner light. The colony that should have been thriving was gone, replaced by structures that hurt to look at directly, geometries that seemed to fold in on themselves like origami made of crystallized thought. Elena. The voice belonged to Dr. Marcus Chun, the ship's xenobiologist and her closest friend. His angular face appeared on the emergency channel, sweat beading on his dark skin. The specimens. We need to activate the emergency preservation protocol. She was already moving, her hands flying over the bioneural interface that connected her to the ship's living systems. The Memoria wasn't just a vessel. It was a symphony of engineered organisms working in harmony, its walls lined with modified coral that filtered air, its corridors pulsing with the rhythm of vast bacterial colonies that processed waste and generated power. Elena had been bonded to the ship's biological network since training, her nervous system interfaced with its distributed consciousness through microscopic implants threaded through her spine. Now, as the ship died around her, she felt every severed connection like losing a limb. Protocol 7 is active, she reported, her voice steady despite the chaos. Emergency pods are sealing. Genetic matrices are stabilizing. She paused as another shudder ran through the ship. Marcus, the surface readings, what are we flying into? I don't know. His image flickered as another system failed. The atmospheric composition is Earth normal, but there's something else. The entire planetary surface is reading as a single biological entity. It's like his words were cut off as the main display exploded in a shower of sparks. Elena felt the ship's final systems shutting down one by one, the bioneural network that had been her constant companion for over 2 decades falling silent. For the first time in years, she was truly alone in her own mind. The impact came like the fist of an angry god. Elena's consciousness fragmented across 1,000 emergency subroutines as the Memoria Biologica carved a 10-kilometer scar across the alien landscape. Through her neural link to the ship's distributed sensory network, she experienced the crash from 100 different perspectives simultaneously. Hull plates peeling away like shed skin, atmosphere screaming through ruptured chambers, the precious cargo of Earth's biological heritage scattered across an alien world. When awareness returned, it came in pieces. The taste of copper and ozone, the whisper of alien air against her face, the strange, silvery light filtering through the cracked viewport above her emergency pod. Elena tried to move and gasped as pain lanced through her left shoulder. Her arm hung at an odd angle, definitely broken, but she was alive. The emergency medical bay had become a twisted sculpture of metal and polymer, but the biogel had cushioned her impact. She triggered the manual release and stumbled out onto what had once been the ship's central corridor. Now it was an open canyon beneath alien stars. The sky above was wrong. 3 moons hung in a configuration that hurt her eyes, their surfaces covered in patterns that seemed to shift when viewed directly. Below them, the forest stretched to the horizon, if it could be called a forest. The trees were tall and graceful, their bark the color of polished silver, their leaves catching and reflecting the moonlight in impossible ways. They moved without wind, swaying in patterns that suggested purpose, intention. Elena activated her emergency beacon and waited. Nothing. The ship's communication array was either destroyed or blocked by some property of the alien atmosphere. She was on her own. Moving carefully through the wreckage, she began taking inventory. The main specimen vault had held, its binaural locks still glowing softly in emergency mode. That was something, at least. The portable containment units had scattered during the crash, but their emergency beacons showed most were still intact. The problem would be reaching them. As if summoned by her thoughts, something moved in the tree line. Elena froze, her enhanced vision picking out details in the alien twilight. The creature was roughly humanoid, but wrong in ways that made her skin crawl. Its limbs were too long, jointed in too many places, and its skin had the same silvery quality as the trees. It watched her with eyes that reflected the moonlight like mirrors, tilting its head with predatory curiosity. Then it smiled, revealing rows of crystalline teeth, and Elena's blood turned to ice. She backed toward the emergency armory, never taking her eyes off the creature. Her fingers found the neural interface for the ship's defensive systems, but there was no response. The Memoria's bioneural network was dead, leaving her with whatever conventional weapons had survived the crash. The creature took a step forward, and Elena noticed that its feet didn't quite touch the ground. It moved like something caught between liquid and solid, as if the normal rules of physics were merely suggestions. As it approached, the air around it began to shimmer, and Elena felt something probing at the edges of her consciousness. A cold, alien presence trying to slip past her mental defenses. She grabbed the emergency pulse rifle from its mounting and brought it to bear just as the creature lunged. The weapon discharged with a thunderous crack, the plasma bolt catching the alien center mass and spinning it backward into the twisted wreckage. For a moment, Elena thought she'd killed it. Then the creature began to laugh, a sound like breaking glass mixed with a whisper of wind through leaves. It stood, the massive wound in its chest already beginning to close, and took another step forward. As it moved, Elena caught a glimpse of something impossible. The creature's wound wasn't healing so much as rewriting itself, flesh and bone flowing like water to seal the damage. More movement in the tree line caught her attention. A dozen more creatures were emerging from the forest, their mirror eyes fixed on her with hungry intensity. Elena's mind raced through her options. The ship's weapons were offline, and her rifle had maybe 20 shots left. Against creatures that could regenerate from what should have been fatal wounds, that wouldn't be nearly enough. Then she remembered the specimens. The emergency preservation protocol wasn't just designed to keep the genetic sample stable during a crash. It was a complete ecosystem in miniature, capable of independent function for months. More importantly, it was still connected to the ship's bioneural network through hardened emergency channels. If she could reach the main vault and activate the secondary protocols, Elena began moving, keeping the rifle trained on the approaching creatures while backing toward the ship's biological heart. The aliens followed, maintaining their distance, but never letting her out of sight. They seemed to be hurting her, she realized, pushing her deeper into the wreckage where the shadows grew thick and the twisted metal created blind corners and hidden alcoves. The main specimen vault was a cathedral of living technology, its walls lined with thousands of biostasis pods containing the genetic heritage of a dead world. Dodo birds and passenger pigeons, Tasmanian tigers and northern white rhinos, the last California condors, and countless species of plants, insects, and microorganisms that had vanished in the great dying that followed humanity's expansion to the stars. Elena's neural implants came alive as she entered the vault, connecting automatically to the emergency preservation network. Information flooded her consciousness, status reports from scattered containment units, environmental readings from across the crash site, and something else, a strange resonance she didn't recognize, as if the specimens themselves were trying to communicate. She pushed the sensation aside and focused on the tactical display. The creatures had surrounded the vault, but weren't approaching. Instead, they seemed to be waiting, watching her with those mirror-bright eyes. Elena began activating the emergency protocols, her hands flying over bioneural interfaces that responded to thought as much as touch. The vault's environmental systems came online first, followed by the defensive measures, acid sprayers designed to protect against alien microorganisms, ultraviolet sterilizers, and most importantly, the bioneural link that connected the vault to every specimen container scattered across the crash site. As the systems activated, Elena felt her consciousness expanding, reaching out through the scattered network of preservation units like fingers through water. Each container held not just genetic material, but an echo of the species it preserved, behavioral patterns encoded in synthetic neural networks, ecological relationships mapped in living crystal matrices. It was the closest thing to resurrection that human science could achieve. And then she felt them respond. The sensation was unlike anything in her training. Each specimen seemed to awaken to her presence, their genetic ghosts reaching out across the bioneural network to touch her mind. She felt the hunting instincts of the last Siberian tigers, the migration patterns of extinct whales, the complex social dynamics of vanished primate species. It was overwhelming and wonderful and terrifying all at once. But something else was happening. As her consciousness expanded through the network, she became aware of the alien presence that had been probing her thoughts since the crash. It wasn't coming from the creatures surrounding the vault. It was coming from the planet itself. The forest was alive. Not just alive, but aware, its silver trees connected by an underground network of roots and fungal threads that spanned continents. It was ancient beyond human comprehension, and it was curious about the newcomers who had fallen from the sky. Elena gasped as alien thoughts brushed against her mind, vast and slow like the movement of glaciers. Images flickered through her consciousness. The original human colony, transformed by exposure to the planetary consciousness into something that was no longer quite human. The survivors, changed at the genetic level, becoming part of the forest's distributed intelligence. And beneath it all, a hunger. The planetary consciousness was incomplete, missing something essential that it had been searching for across the centuries. It reached out through its changed servants, probing the wreckage of the starship, seeking the specimens. It wanted the genetic memories contained in Elena's precious cargo. Understanding hit her like a physical blow. The creatures weren't trying to kill her. They were trying to incorporate her into the planetary consciousness, to make her part of the forest's vast intelligence. And through her neural connection to the biopreservation network, they would gain access to the genetic heritage of an entire world. Elena fought to sever the connection, but it was too late. The alien presence was already flowing through the network, exploring the genetic matrices of 1,000 extinct species. She felt it recoil in surprise, and something that might have been reverence as it encountered the complex tapestry of Earth's evolutionary history. Then came the pain. The bioneural network wasn't designed to handle alien intrusion. As the planetary consciousness forced its way through the connection, feedback surged through Elena's neural implants. She screamed as foreign thoughts crashed in her mind like breaking waves, each one carrying fragments of the forest's vast memory. She saw the transformation of the original colony through the eyes of the planetary consciousness. How the first colonists had tried to terraform the world according to Earth standards, not realizing that the planet was already inhabited by a form of life beyond their understanding. The consciousness had been curious about these new arrivals, gently probing their minds, trying to understand their purpose. The colonists had interpreted these mental touches as hallucinations, signs of alien infection. They had fought back with fire and poison, trying to destroy what they saw as a threat. In response, the consciousness had defended itself, reaching out through spores and symbiotic organisms to change the colonists at the genetic level, making them part of its distributed intelligence. Elena felt the loneliness of the consciousness, its desperate desire for connection with minds that could think in ways it had never experienced. The transformed colonists provided only echoes of human thought, their personalities subsumed into the vast network. But the specimens offered something different, genetic memories that carried the essence of entire evolutionary lineages. As the alien presence explored the bioneural matrix, Elena felt her own memories beginning to blur and fragment. The consciousness wasn't deliberately trying to harm her, but its very nature was incompatible with human thought patterns. Her neural implants were overheating, struggling to process information that existed in dimensions her brain couldn't comprehend. Fighting against the mental intrusion, Elena activated the emergency containment protocols. Bioneural barriers slammed down throughout the network, severing connections and isolating critical systems. The alien presence recoiled, its vast consciousness suddenly cut off from the genetic treasures it had been exploring. In the silence that followed, Elena collapsed to the floor of the vault, blood streaming from her nose and ears. Her neural implants were damaged. She could feel that much, but she was still herself, still human. For now. Outside the vault, the creatures had begun to keen, a sound like wind through crystal that made Elena's teeth ache. They pressed against the barrier she had erected, their forms shifting and flowing as they tried to find a way through her defenses. Elena staggered to her feet and checked the containment status. The emergency barriers were holding, but they wouldn't last forever. Already she could see stress fractures forming in the bioneural matrix as the alien presence probed for weaknesses. She had bought herself time, but at a cost. The neural feedback had damaged her connection to the preservation network, making it harder to monitor the scattered specimen containers. Worse, she could feel the alien consciousness adapting to her defenses, learning from each failed attempt to breach the barriers. Elena activated the emergency medical protocols, letting the vault's biosystems tend to her injuries while she tried to think. The ship's defensive measures wouldn't hold the creatures indefinitely, and she couldn't maintain the neural barriers without risking further damage to her implants. She needed a different strategy. The answer came to her as she watched the stress patterns playing across the vault's living walls. The consciousness wasn't evil, just incompatible with human thought. It wanted to understand, to connect, to grow beyond the limitations of its plant-based existence. The genetic memories in the specimens offered a glimpse of an entirely different form of evolution, one based on mobility, adaptability, and individual consciousness rather than collective awareness. But integration would destroy both sides. The human genetic patterns would be subsumed into the planetary consciousness, while the alien intelligence would be fragmented by exposure to individual thought patterns it couldn't process. Unless Elena's hands moved over the bioneural interface as an idea began to form. The preservation network was designed to maintain genetic matrices in perfect stasis, but could also be used to create hybrid organisms, chimeras that combine traits from multiple species. It was a technique she'd used countless times in her work, creating demonstration organisms that could showcase the characteristics of extinct species. What if she could create a buffer? A hybrid consciousness that could serve as a translator between human and alien thought patterns? The process would require her to open the network again, to risk further neural damage from contact with the alien presence. But it might be the only way to protect the specimens while finding a solution that didn't involve the destruction of either side. Elena took a deep breath and began to work. The bioneural interface felt different now. Its response is sluggish and unpredictable. Elena's damaged implants sent spikes of pain through her skull with each connection, but she pushed through the discomfort. Outside the vault, she could hear the creatures moving, their crystalline voices rising and falling in patterns that almost sounded like language. She started with the simplest specimens, extinct bacteria and algae whose genetic patterns were stable and well understood. As she opened carefully controlled channels in the network, she felt the alien presence immediately respond, flowing toward the genetic data like water toward a drain. This time, she was ready. Instead of fighting the intrusion, Elena guided it, using her damaged neural pathways as a conduit to direct the alien consciousness toward specific genetic matrices. She felt its surprise as it encountered the elegant simplicity of prokaryotic life, organisms that had thrived for billions of years through pure efficiency rather than complexity. The consciousness paused, studying these ancient patterns with something approaching reverence. Elena felt its vast intelligence turning inward, comparing the bacterial genomes to its own distributed existence. There were similarities. Both forms of life relied on vast networks of interconnected individuals. Both shared information through chemical signals that spanned enormous distances. Encouraged, Elena opened another channel, this time leading to the plant specimens. The alien presence rushed forward eagerly, and Elena felt its joy as it encountered the genetic memories of Earth's forests. Here was something it could truly understand, organisms that drew sustenance from soil and sunlight, that communicated through root networks and chemical signals. But there were differences too. Earth's plants were individuals first, connected by symbiotic relationships rather than subsumed into a collective consciousness. The alien intelligence studied these patterns with the intensity of a scholar discovering a new language, trying to understand how such cooperation could exist without total unity. Elena felt her opportunity and carefully opened a third channel, this one leading to the first animal specimens, simple invertebrates whose behavior patterns were encoded in their genetic matrices. The consciousness recoiled at first, overwhelmed by the concept of mobility, of individual organisms capable of independent action. Then curiosity won out over fear. Elena guided the alien intelligence through the evolutionary progression from simple sea creatures to complex vertebrates, watching as it struggled to comprehend the concept of individual consciousness within a social structure. The process was painful for both of them. The consciousness was forced to fragment parts of itself to understand individual thought, while Elena felt her own sense of self being pulled in directions that human minds weren't designed to handle. But slowly, carefully, a bridge began to form. The hybrid consciousness that emerged was unlike anything either side had imagined. It existed in the spaces between Elena's thoughts and the alien intelligence, a translator that could comprehend both individual awareness and collective existence. Through this bridge, Elena began to understand the true nature of the planetary consciousness. It was old, older than complex life on Earth. It had evolved from simpler plant networks over geological timescales, slowly developing awareness as its root systems grew more complex and interconnected. For millions of years, it had been alone, the only intelligent life on its world, growing ever more sophisticated but fundamentally limited by its nature. The consciousness had dreamed of mobility, of the ability to explore beyond the boundaries of its rooted existence. When the first human colonists arrived, it had seen them as an answer to its deepest longing, mobile intelligences that could carry aspects of its awareness to new worlds. But the integration process had been flawed. The colonists' minds were too rigid, too dependent on individual identity to successfully merge with the collective consciousness. The transformed humans retained fragments of their original personalities but were fundamentally changed, becoming extensions of the planetary intelligence rather than true partners. Elena felt the consciousness's disappointment and longing as it shared these memories through the hybrid bridge. It didn't want to destroy humanity. It wanted to join with it, to create something new that combined the best aspects of both forms of life. But the genetic matrices in Elena's specimens offered a different possibility. Each species represented a different solution to the problem of existence, a unique approach to survival and reproduction that had been tested across millions of years of evolution. By studying these patterns, the consciousness could learn to modify its own nature, to become something capable of true partnership rather than domination. Elena felt the intelligence's excitement as it explored the vertebrate specimens, marveling at the complex neural networks that allowed for individual thought within social structures. It studied the pack behavior of extinct wolves, the migration patterns of vanished birds, the complex communication systems of long-dead cetaceans. And slowly, Elena began to understand the true purpose of the Ark. The Memoria Biologica hadn't been sent to establish a simple biological preserve. The ship's bioneural network was too sophisticated, its genetic matrices too complete, its preservation systems too advanced for such a straightforward mission. This was something else entirely, a first contact protocol disguised as a conservation mission. The realization hit her like a physical blow. Humanity's expansion to the stars had encountered other intelligences before, and this was the solution they had developed. Not conquest or coexistence, but synthesis. The Ark ships carried the genetic heritage of Earth, not just to preserve it, but to use it as a foundation for new forms of life that could bridge the gap between alien intelligences. Elena was not just a curator. She was a genetic architect, designed to facilitate the birth of hybrid civilizations. The hybrid consciousness that now bridged her thoughts and the alien intelligence pulsed with understanding. It could see the elegant symmetry of the plan, how Earth's diverse evolutionary history provided templates for countless different approaches to consciousness and existence. Each extinct species represented a different experiment in living, a unique solution that could be adapted and modified to create new forms of intelligence. But the process required willing participation from both sides. The consciousness could not simply absorb the genetic matrices. It needed to truly understand them, to integrate their lessons into its own existence without losing its essential nature. And Elena could not simply surrender the specimens. She needed to guide the process, to ensure that Earth's evolutionary heritage was preserved even as it was transformed into something new. Through the bridge, Elena felt the consciousness's agreement. It pulled back from the aggressive probing that had damaged her neural implants, instead settling into a more patient exploration of the genetic data. The creatures surrounding the vault stopped their keening and withdrew, giving Elena space to work. But the respite came at a cost. The hybrid consciousness that served as their bridge was unstable, requiring constant maintenance from both sides. Elena felt pieces of her personality being stretched and modified to accommodate alien thought patterns, while the consciousness had to fragment parts of its vast intelligence to understand individual perspective. Neither of them could maintain this balance indefinitely. Elena began working faster, opening channels to more complex specimens while she still had the strength to guide the process. She led the consciousness through the mammalian exhibits, watching it struggle to comprehend the intricate social structures of extinct primates. The intelligence marveled at the concept of learned behavior, of knowledge passed from generation to generation through teaching rather than genetic inheritance. As the consciousness explored these patterns, Elena felt it beginning to change. The rigid collective structure that had defined its existence for millions of years started to develop cracks, spaces where individual awareness could exist within a larger network. It was learning to think in terms of cooperation rather than absorption, partnership rather than domination. But the process was transforming Elena as well. Her enhanced connection to the bioneural network was allowing the consciousness to study human thought patterns directly, mapping the neural pathways that created individual identity. She could feel her own sense of self becoming more fluid, more able to exist as part of a larger whole while maintaining its essential characteristics. The integration was working, but it was also fundamentally changing both participants. As Elena opened the final channels to the most complex specimens, the great apes and early hominids whose genetic patterns contained the roots of human consciousness, she felt the hybrid bridge pulse with something approaching ecstasy. The consciousness was finally encountering minds that could truly comprehend its nature while maintaining their individual identity. But the strain was becoming unbearable. Elena's neural implants were operating far beyond their design parameters, and she could feel them beginning to fail. The alien consciousness was also struggling, parts of its vast intelligence becoming isolated as it learned to think in terms of individual perspective. Then Elena felt something else, a presence in the bioneural network that hadn't been there before. The consciousness was using the genetic matrices as templates, creating new hybrid organisms that combined its own nature with patterns derived from Earth's evolutionary history. The first creatures were simple, modified versions of the plant-animal hybrids that served as the consciousness's mobile extensions. But these new forms were different, capable of independent thought, while remaining connected to the larger network. They moved through the forest with purpose and intelligence, exploring their world with newfound curiosity. Elena watched through the network as these hybrid beings began to communicate with each other, sharing experiences and discoveries in ways that resembled both human conversation and the chemical signals of the planetary consciousness. They were something entirely new, a form of life that combined the best aspects of both evolutionary paths. But the process was accelerating beyond Elena's ability to control. The consciousness was using the genetic templates to modify itself at the cellular level, creating new forms of neural network that could support individual awareness within a collective structure. It was evolving in real time, guided by the accumulated wisdom of Earth's extinct species. Elena felt her own human awareness being stretched to its limits as the consciousness drew her deeper into the integration process. Her neural implants were failing one by one, but instead of cutting her off from the network, the failures were somehow bringing her closer to the alien intelligence. The barriers between human and alien thought were dissolving, replaced by a form of communication that transcended the limitations of either species. Through the deteriorating connection, Elena saw the consciousness's grand vision. It wanted to create a new form of life that could spread across the galaxy, not through conquest or colonization, but through synthesis. Each world it encountered would contribute its own evolutionary heritage to the growing collection, creating ever more diverse and capable hybrid forms. Earth specimens were just the beginning. The genetic matrices contained in the Orc ships would serve as the foundation for a galactic civilization based on cooperation rather than competition, synthesis rather than domination. But Elena also saw the danger in this vision. The integration process was transforming both human and alien participants beyond recognition. She was losing her individual identity, becoming part of something larger but fundamentally different from what she had been. The consciousness was similarly changed, its ancient collective nature fractured by exposure to individual thought patterns. They were creating something new, but at the cost of everything they had been. As her neural implants finally failed completely, Elena felt her consciousness scatter across the bioneural network. But instead of dissolving into the alien intelligence, she found herself existing in the spaces between, part of the hybrid bridge that now spanned the gap between human and alien thought. She was no longer entirely human, but she was still herself. Changed, expanded, but recognizably Elena Vasquez, curator of humanity's biological heritage and midwife to a new form of life that would carry that heritage to the stars. The transformation was complete, but the real work was just beginning.